بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خاتم النبيين وإمام المرسلين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. We are now on to the sixth lesson for the Creed of Deliverance, عقيدة النجاة for Imam Muhammad ibn Ja'far al-Kattani. And continuing on with the text itself, starting from line 6, the Imam begins talking about what is necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for God. And this necessity is arrived at through contemplation, through reflection, through the use of logic. And the first one is فَوَاجِبٌ لِرَبِّنَا الْوُجُودِ, that it is necessary that our Lord have existence. So, just back to this issue of logic and fitrah, and that natural, innate nature in mankind. The existence of God is actually something that we can arrive at through both ways, through the way of logic, just reasoning it out, just through contemplation, as well as just our innate nature. We have this inclination to recognize the existence of God. And if you look throughout the history of mankind, there has never been a society of atheists. Atheism really didn't begin to start creeping its head up until, you could arguably say, somewhere around the 1700s, when David Hume was arguably to be the first one to really come out and talk about it like that. The ways of atheists before then, though, they weren't atheists in the meaning that they reject the existence of God completely. Atheists initially were rejecting some notions of religion. They were rejecting, prophecy. And in the Islamic tradition, these were called malahida, even though that they were not mulhideen. They were called atheists in the Islamic tradition, in medieval Islamic tradition. They were called atheists, but they were not rejecting the existence of God. Like Abu Ala al-Ma'arri, for example, he accepted the existence of God, but he never really completely rejected it. Razi, not Fakhruddin al-Razi. I can't think of his first name right now, but al-Razi was one of the greatest physicians that Islam and pharmacologists that Islam has, the Islamic nation has produced. And he had some writings on philosophy, and he rejected the existence of prophets, and he was pretty staunch about it, and he was almost a polemic in his nature. However, when it came to the existence of God, he was believing in a deistic God, a God that not a personal God, not a God that would send messages and messengers. So these were odd cases. The general case for the existence of God is really attested to through our just natural inclination, as well as it's collaborated with the fact that you can just arrive at it through logic and reasoning. Now we have a couple of movements, as I mentioned before, where unfortunately we have either people that will negate logic completely and they will use Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his writings against logicians, or ones that will reject the fitrah completely and will just say, no, we gotta just go with just the intellect, because fitrah, they just say that it's, you start off with nothing and it's really blank and you can't really rely on what you incline towards. There is a lecture that's been posted recently on YouTube by one of the probably most prominent Islamic teachers, Muslim teachers, teachers of the Islamic tradition, and I'm not going to get into names and to show you who it is. You'll know it when you look it up. But he was dealing with the issue of fitrah, and it was really disappointing to hear him talk about Imam Al Ghazali in a way that was not really to use the best way to describe it would be just academically dishonest. And I say academically dishonest because this teacher actually he says that he's done his dissertation on it's in philosophy and Islamic theology, and one chapter was dealing with Imam Al Ghazali. And the reason I say it's academically dishonest is because if you had just read a few lines further into what he was quoting, it completely negates what he was claiming about Imam Al Ghazali and what Imam Al Ghazali was saying about Fitrah. So this natural innate dispensation of man. And we'll just go into this a little bit of an elaboration on this issue. With Imam Al Ghazali specifically, some people make claims about Imam Al Ghazali that he got too much into philosophy to the point that he negated the fitrah completely. And they'll say the Ghazalian way of thinking is to say that the fitrah has no role. And to prove this, to prove that they're not the first to say this and that other great Islamic scholars, Muslim scholars have said this, some people will quote Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, and this has a particular oomph to it, because Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi was one of the students of Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali, and he allegedly said, شيخنا دخل في نظر الفلاسفة وأراد أن يخرج منهم فما قدر. Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi said that our teacher got into the way of thinking of philosophers, and he did that obviously in order for him to refute them, but when he tried to get out of it, he couldn't come out of it. What he's saying is that his thinking was polluted by the thinking of philosophers, and he could not get rid of that type of thinking. Imam Ibn Hajar al-Haytami was asked about this statement in his Al-Fatawa al-Hadithiyya, and his book Al-Fatawa al-Hadithiyya, and he was asked about this statement of Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. And by the way, when I say Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, don't confuse that with Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, the one that wrote Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyya, the Sufi figure. That's not the same person. So Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, in response to being asked about this, he said, لكن أبا حامد يكفر الفلاسفة في غير موضع. But Imam Abu Hamid, he actually declares philosophers as non-Muslims in more than one occasion. وبين فساد طريقتهم, and he showed the corrupt nature of their ways. وأنها لا تحصل المقصود, and that لا تحصل المقصود, and that it doesn't actually grant one the arrival at the thing that they're trying to arrive at. So he's saying that Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali, in his writings, he's shown them to be heretics, he's shown their methodology to be flawed in its nature, and that their approach will not get them to answer and address the existential questions of mankind. And then he says, واشتغل في آخر حياته بالبخاري ومات على ذلك. And that towards the end of his life, he was actually more concerned with studying hadith, Imam Bukhari's hadith and whatnot. وقيل إنه رجع عن تلك الكتب, and it's said that some of his books he actually retracted, and he's referring here to books like مشكات الأنوار. ومنهم من يقول إنها مكذوبة عليه, and some people say that these actually were falsely attributed to Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali. You need to understand that one of the things that people make sure of is when they talk about books that were attributed to certain scholars, there is a tradition of actually ascertaining that these books were really written by those scholars, because at their time, if somebody had a particular ideology that they wanted to spread around and they were not particularly known or trusted, there was some people that would actually write the book and then they would just sign it with the name of a major scholar. This was we have this preserved. Even Imam Al-Sha'rani, for example, his works, some of his students were shocked about what they found in the market to be his writings, and they knew that that's not really what positions he held. So they would take the books and go back to Imam Al-Sha'rani, and Imam Al-Sha'rani would pull out his original copy that he wrote by his hand, not the scribes, and he would show them that some of the things were just concocted. They were just added onto him. So some of the books of Imam Al Ghazali, it's alleged that they may not have actually been his works, the ones that seem to be more on the philosophical side, in regards to belief and whatnot. So anyways, Imam Ibn Hajar al-Haytami is just kind of refuting that statement of Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. Now, I'm just going to remind you by a statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats in more than one occasion in the Quran. And one example of it is in Surah Al-Shu'ara, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ وَلَا تَعْثَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. That do not deprive people of what is theirs, and do not spread corruption on the earth. Now, for the sake of, and when we say do not deprive people of what is theirs, you'll get that in a minute, what I mean by that. For the sake of academic honesty, let's see what, if that claim about Imam Al Ghazali did in fact try to refute and negate the Fitrah by saying that you have to doubt everything. Because in this lecture, this teacher was saying that Imam Al Ghazali claimed that you have to doubt everything. Absolutely everything. Which is, and then he states that that's the path that René Descartes took. And you'll see that Descartes is influenced in his autobiography. It sounds very similar to what Imam Al Ghazali was saying. And I've mentioned before that René Descartes, we have empirical evidence of him actually plagiarizing from Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali. So his autobiography is not really his autobiography. He's just, taking from Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali, and he just went on his own method after that. So for Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali, the book that this Muslim teacher was quoting was Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, Deliverance from Error. And let's see if that claim that Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali, that he said you have to doubt everything, let's see if that's true, and that he actually says there is no such thing as fitrah. So I'm going to read from the Arabic and I'm going to translate it. I can give you a page, but it really depends on the copy that you have, so it's not going to be useful. What I can tell you is that from the very beginning, about a couple of paragraphs through, from the start of his book, Deliverance from Error, Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali, and by the way, this has been translated, so you can find an English copy for yourself, and I think it's Fons Vitae, I think it's how you say their name. They have it translated. But anyways, Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali says, وَقَدْ كَانَ التَّعَطُّشُ إِلَى دَرْكِ حَقَائِقِ الْأُمُورِ دَأْبِي وَدَيْدَنِ. That the thirst for realizing the truth behind matters is really the way that I've taken my method to go, and my approach to things, and how I've made things incumbent upon me, is to look for the truth of everything. من أول أمري وريعان عمري غريزة وفطرة. From the beginning of the start of my affairs, and from the youth, from the very young age of mine. غريزة وفطرة. It was in my innate nature. من الله وضعها في جبلتي لا باختياري وحيلتي. That this thirst for reaching the truth behind matters being part and parcel of my nature, and it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that God has put in my character. It was an innate nature of mine. غريزة وفطرة لا باختياري وحيلتي. And it wasn't something by my own choice. So Imam Al Ghazali here is saying that it's not something that I've concocted on my own. Something from the very young age, since I can remember, I've always looked for the truth behind things, and I've always wanted to investigate matters to the full extent. حتى انحلت عني رابطة التقليد وانكسرت علي العقائد الموروثة على قرب عهد سن الصبا. Until the point that the tie, the knot of blind imitation was loosened and taken apart, and those beliefs that I inherited from a young age, from my own parents and my culture and society and whatnot, they were broken. Because as soon as I started investigating things like that, all of these just got broken apart. إذ رأيت صبيان النصارى لا يكون لهم نشوء إلا على التنصر. Because I've noticed that when you look at Christian children, there is no other way for them to grow up except as Christians. وصبيان اليهود لا نشوء لهم إلا على التهود. And the children of Jews, there is no growing up for them and raising them except upon Judaism. وصبيان المسلمين لا نشوء لهم إلا على الإسلام. And the children of Muslims, there is no raising them except upon anything other than Islam. So he's saying that I just looked around and I noticed that the origin of people's belief seems to be the fact that they were born into a particular family. And that's something that, for those that like to read modern day type of people that just regurgitate things, Richard Dawkins talks about it in The God Delusion, that how he doesn't like looking at children being called Christian children, Jewish children, Muslim children. He says, call them children of Muslim parents. He's getting at that. Heidegger, Western philosopher Heidegger, he said it's a concept called thrownness. Thrownness is that you were just thrown into a culture when you were born, and you just took upon yourself the beliefs and the theology and whatever it is from that culture that you were brought up in. And right now, you'll find children that are growing up, and you'll see them as young as in elementary school talking about how they're atheists. Well, how is a child atheist? It's because they're just repeating what they were told at home. So this is what Imam Al Ghazali is saying, that all of these beliefs seem to be arising from just inheritance. And so he says after that, وَسَمِعْتُ الْحَدِيثَ الْمَرْوِيَ عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. And I heard the hadith, that the narration that is narrated on the authority of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, حيث قال, where he said, كل مولود يولد على الفطرة فأبواه يهودانه وينصرانه ويمجسانه. That every child is born upon that innate nature, that innate dispensation, on to the truth, whatever it is, al-fitrah. And just a point, and this Muslim teacher actually, I'm glad that he mentioned it in his class. Fitrah is not equal to Islam as in Islam the religion. All fitrah is, and that's why when people say that, to say that someone reverted. Nobody reverts. Number one, reversion is to an initial state, back to being a Muslim, and people were not born as Muslim. Number two, reversion is a passive process. Conversion is an active process. So it's not accurate to call Muslims that that were not Muslim before, to call them reverts. They are converts. They made a conscious decision to become Muslims, and to take that away from them is not fair. So Imam Al Ghazali is saying, the Prophet ﷺ said, every newborn is born upon that natural dispensation, that natural innate nature towards the truth. That's what fitrah is. When you hear the truth, it resonates with you. فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ. Then his parents will make them a Jew, وَيُنَصِّرَانِهِ, or they will make them a Christian, وَيُمَجِّسَانِهِ, or they will make him a Magian, a Zoroastrian. فتحرك باطني إلى طلب حقيقة الفطرة الأصلية وحقيقة العقائد العارضة بتقليد الوالدين والأستاذين. My innate nature, my dispensation that he mentioned, that I was looking for the truth behind things, the essential truth behind things, it was moved towards finding out the truth behind this fitrah, and the truth behind beliefs that are just inherited and that we just take upon ourselves from and the ones that might negate that fitrah, that we just get from society and from our parents and our teachers. والتمييز بين هذه التقليدات وأوائلها تلقينات وفي تمييز الحق منها عن الباطل اختلافات. So he's saying that I was just looking to discern between the truth and the falsehood, and what I inherited as just an inheritance, and what is actually part of that fitrah that Allah has created me with. So right there from the very beginning, what you get from this is that Imam Al Ghazali is not saying there is no such thing as fitrah and that I have to doubt everything. He's questioning to find a way to discern between what was inherited and what he was created with. That's all he's trying to find out. That's the very beginning of his book, and he tells you that. So, again, back to this idea of why I call it academic dishonesty, is because it seems that this teacher, when he was talking in the lecture, he just stopped at where Imam Al Ghazali is talking about how children of Jewish parents are just become Jew and Christians become Christian and Muslims become Muslim. And he just stopped at that. And he doesn't finish the rest of that statement because that sentence wasn't even completed yet. And then he tells you, and this is another issue that it's really unfortunate how some of our Muslim scholars are represented by teachers. And this really goes to show that, this is just a little tangent here. I'll give you one example just to make it clear instead of just beating around the bush. The issue, for example, on music. The issue of music and its ruling in Islam, is it permissible or is it not permissible? And I'm not talking about just singing and just reciting poetry. I'm talking really about somebody going to play the guitar and the piano, learning how to play the violin or the cello. I'm talking about musical instruments. The way that it's presented by a lot of people is as if there is no difference in opinion. That is completely impermissible and you can never, ever, 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 at all be around it. Shut your ears and walk away. And I'm not talking here about hip-hop music and things like that. I'm talking about just, let's say classical, Beethoven or Mozart or Bach, or let's say that the anashid that are being recited by people like Sami Yusuf and Maher Zain right now that use musical instruments. Is that permissible or it's not? You will have some teachers that will present the matter as if there is no difference in opinion whatsoever. And they will back that up by stating a verse from the Quran and a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and then tell you, see, it's very clear. What that does in the mind of the listener is that it actually makes the scholars that deem these things permissible, that have arrived at their permissibility, it makes them almost untrustworthy. Because, after all, these scholars are going against the Quran and the Sunnah by making this permissible. For the sake of academic honesty, let's just, yes, most scholars, we can say that there's many scholars that have determined some things to be, like music, to be impermissible. However, that does not mean that the scholars that have deemed it permissible are going against the Quran and the Sunnah. All they're doing is that they're picking a different interpretation of the same hadith and the same Quran that's been used by people that have declared it impermissible. The ones that will tell you, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذُ لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ, I think it's Surah Luqman, where there's people that will take idle talk, and then they will tell you this idle talk, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu have deemed it to be, he's talking about ghina, singing, music. And then they will tell you the hadith about the end of time, that there will be some of my nation that will, some of my people will deem fornication, drinking, music to be permissible. Okay. And they'll go with that and they'll tell you, see, these are clear-cut evidences. Well, the same Quran and the same hadith is being used by everybody. And the scholars know all these things. So, rather than just sticking to Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, for example, the other scholars have gone with the statements of Ibn Umar or Ibn Abbas or other Sahaba, as well as other Tabi'een, about this ayah, about these verses, to explain what these verses mean. The Quran, some of it is completely clear-cut, there is no discussion about it. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, fornication has become impermissible, it's clear-cut, it's a direct statement. But when we're talking about lahu al-hadith, that idle talk, you can come up with different interpretations of that. The point behind bringing up this example is, it's not, and this is where it goes back to وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُم. Do not deprive people of what is theirs. To present matters in such a way that it makes it in the mind of the listener that some scholars are going against the Quran and the Sunnah, without really directly saying that. It's just the way that it's being presented, it gives that impression. It makes that scholar seem less worthy of respect, of listening to, of whatever. So the same thing goes here with Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali. This teacher in the class, he mentions, right after he mentions that, he says, but the Prophet ﷺ talks about كل مولود يولد على الفطرة, and he mentions the hadith, not mentioning that Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali actually does mention the hadith right after the statement that he quoted him in. And all Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali was looking for is to just a law of discernment. How do I determine what is part of my true nature and what is something that I just happen to inherit from being raised up in a particular environment? Just to be fair to the Imam, we need to go through that. And then after that, as he's looking through for the law of discernment, the next chapter, Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali titles مدخل السفسطة وجحد العلوم. That how one can enter into sophistry, because that's what he entered into. How one can enter into sophistry and rejection of knowledge, just different knowledges that one can attain. Now, to say that Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali said completely reject everything, doubt everything, and just go with that, and you have to be in an initial state of doubt, and you have to arrive at examine everything and use logic and all that stuff. Well, let's just, again, for the sake of academic honesty, see what Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali says. He says that when he went on that path, he actually became ill. And he says, وَدَامَ قَرِيبًا مِنْ شَهْرَيْنِ فَأَعْضَلَ الدَّاء, that his illness was really took over him. And it lasted for about 2 months. أَنَا فِيهِمَا عَلَى مَذْهَبِ السَّفْسَطَةِ بِحُكْمِ الْحَالِ. When you read that chapter, and maybe inshallah at some point we'll go through this book and actually teach it, he talks about how he ended up rejecting knowledge that he can arrive at through the senses, which then became rejecting knowledge that he can arrive at through reason, which then became rejection of all types of knowledges, and that's how he entered into sophistry, and that made him ill. It really troubled him. And he said, أنا فيهما على مذهب السفسطة بحكم الحال, that just by judgment of my state, I was on that path, and that made me really ill. لا بحكم النطق والمقال, not by what I was saying. If you heard what he was saying during those months that he was ill in, he was not talking sophistry, but his innate nature, like his state became the state of sophistry, and he was doubting everything, and it was really troubling him. حتى شفى الله تعالى من ذلك المرض, that until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cured me from that illness. وعادت النفس إلى الصحة والاعتدال, and my state has finally gotten back to the state of just being straight and being on the healthy. ورجعت الضروريات العقلية مقبولة موثوقا بها على أمن ويقين, and those self-evident truths that one would have finally became, I became trusting in them and had certainty in them. And al-daruriyat, those necessities that he's talking about, for example, to say that a part is smaller than the whole, a part of something is smaller than the whole, that's just a necessity, by necessity. You don't have to think about it, you don't have to contemplate on it. It's just a part is smaller than the whole. 2 is greater than 1. Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali went into a state where he was even doubting those, and that's what made him ill. And he said he finally came back to his senses, because what he was looking for was a way to prove everything. David Hilbert was one of the greatest mathematicians in the 20th century, and at the beginning of the 20th century he was at a conference where he said that we need to prove everything. And one of the things that he was seeking to prove was first principles in mathematics, that 1 + 1 = 2. And he wrote the Encyclopedia Mathematica, where he spent something like a third of it looking to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. That attempt was refuted by a simple statement. He was using mathematics to prove mathematics. That does not work, because some things just have to be taken for granted, that 1 + 1 = 2. A part is smaller than the whole. 2 is greater than 1. These are just self-evident truths. You just have to accept them for what they are. And if you try to prove them, then that means you're going to go into an infinite regress of trying to prove the things that you've proven. And that's what the problem with the argument that Richard Dawkins, that he stole from David Hume, where he says that if you say that God created the world, then who created God? And that just sends you in an infinite regress. We're talking about God being the uncreated being. You don't ask who created God, because that question will just send you on an infinite regress and you'll never arrive at an answer. That's the state that Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali found himself entering into. And then he says that God has cured him from that state. And he said, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ ذَلِكَ. And how did God cure him from that state? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ ذَلِكَ بِنَظْمِ دَلِيلٍ وَتَرْتِيبِ كَلَامٍ. That cure that I got was not based on some ordering of proofs and ordering of talk to prove that these necessities are in fact necessary. بل بنور قذفه الله تعالى في الصدر وذلك النور هو مفتاح أكثر المعارف. But in fact it was by a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has thrown into the heart, and that light is the key to most knowledges. So we're not talking about Imam Al Ghazali looking to prove everything, as this teacher was saying, step out of the room to investigate the room. He just said, this is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has thrown into my heart, and that light is actually the key to most knowledges. فَمَنْ ظَنَّ أَنَّ الْكَشْفَ موقوف على الأدلة المحررة فقد ضيق رحمة الله تعالى الواسعة. And whoever thinks, and this statement is really important, whoever thinks that the exposition of the truth, discerning the truth, is limited to evidential proofs that one can just kind of come up with and investigate, that person then has restricted the vast mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the vast mercy of God. If truth is really limited to just sitting down and doing some logic and philosophy, we got problems, because that. And why does he say that this is restricting the vast mercy of God? As I mentioned in the previous classes, logic, philosophy, these things are not for everybody. Not everybody is able to sit down and go through and examine and do these things. And this is another reason why we say that even people like Stephen Hawking and scientists, for example, to say that science will be the way that will expose the truth. If you really reflect on it, scientists and atheists that are science worshipping, they're looking for scientists to be their prophets. Scientists that are looking to prove the truth using science, they want to be the prophets. It's not that they. And the way that they prove it is just through a method that most of us will not be able to investigate, and so we'll just end up believing what they have to say based on faith. Ask anybody that's supporting things like string theory and quantum mechanics and all the stuff. These guys can write books. These scholars can write books to simplify the matter for you. But if it really came down to it, and you ask any of these just normal everyday atheists that like science, and ask them to just get up on the board and start working out the equations of string theory, they wouldn't even know what to begin with, what symbol to start off with. So all scientists are doing they're just trying to take the role of prophets during this age, and really you could look at them as the new false prophets of this age. Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali is saying that given that not everybody has that ability to restrict the ability to find the truth onto these matters, you've now restricted the vast mercy of God. It's a light within the heart, and that's really the fitrah that Imam Al Ghazali is talking about here. It's a light that God throws into the heart of the person, that tells him that allows him to determine the truth of things from the falsehood of it. So to say that Imam Al Ghazali was rejecting something that rejecting the fitrah is just not a fair thing. And then this Muslim teacher says that Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali says that we start off with a blank slate. Tabula rasa is the term in philosophy. And then he says, well, that doesn't make sense, because the Imam was asserting that we come with a blank slate into the world. And this is a contradiction, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, as he mentions in Surah Al-A'raf, وَإِذَا خَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا أَنْ تَقُولُوا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. When your Lord took out the offspring from the loins of the children of Adam and made them bear witness about themselves, he said, am I not your Lord? And they replied, yes, we bear witness. So you cannot say on the day of resurrection, we were not aware of this. So the reason he says that this is a contradiction with what Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali is saying is because he went on with, towards the end of his book, Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali talks about the truth and the reality of prophecy and how we need prophets. And he starts off that chapter by saying, اعلم أن جوهر الإنسان في أصل الفطرة. Know that the essence of mankind in his innate nature خلق خاليا ساذجا لا خبر معه من عوالم الله تعالى. He was created empty, blank, ignorant of the worlds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْعَوَالِمُ كَثِيرَةٌ لَا يُحْصِيهَا إِلَّا اللَّهَ تَعَالَى. And this creation is much, it's many. All of these things that Allah created, they're many. And no one counts it except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كَمَا قَالَ وَمَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودُ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. That none knows the soldiers of your Lord, the creation of your Lord, except Him. وَإِنَّمَا خَبَرُهُ مِنَ الْعَوَالِمِ بِوَاسِطَةِ الْإِدْرَاكِ. And إِنَّمَا here is for restriction. That the only way for one to learn about the world, and Imam Abu Hamid here is talking about the sensory world, the empirical world. The way for you to know about it is بِوَاسِطَةِ الْإِدْرَاكِ, is through perception. وَكُلُّ إِدْرَاكٍ مِنَ الْإِدْرَاكَاتِ خلق ليطلع الإنسان به على عالم خلق ليطلع الإنسان به على عالم الموجودات. That every type of perception that man has been created with, so he's talking about the five senses, it was created for you to learn about the world of existent things. Imam Abu Hamid Al Ghazali here is talking about knowledge that we attain just from reflection on the world. If we were really born with knowledge of everything, we would not have people investigating and studying and looking into and doing science and doing all of this stuff. Because you're created with all that knowledge. And Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali is saying, clearly we're not born with it, we attain it. This teacher in his class was saying that Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali was saying that man was created empty of everything. And that's not what he said. Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali was restricting what that knowledge that he was saying that we don't have to knowledge of in the empirical sense. We have to learn it. So he's not saying that we're born with nothing at all. He's saying you're born with a fitrah. And that fitrah just lacks things in the sensory world. So just to really make something clear, and this is really a message to everybody. When you're talking about scholars, whether it's we'll have, and just to really be clear about it, not beat around the bush, you'll have the Sufis, Ash'ari type of inclined crowd. They will speak about Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Islam, as if he's some ignoramus that didn't know what he was talking about. He was some idiot that was just يَهْرِفُ بِمَا لَا يَعْرِفُ, just saying things that he's not aware of what he was saying. And look at how ridiculous his statements were and blah blah blah. وَلَا تَبْخَسُ النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُم. Do not deprive people of what is theirs. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was a genius by all accounts. And he was dealing with some deep philosophical problems that most people are not able to handle and get a grasp on. On the other hand, you'll have the Salafis talk about Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali as if he was some ignoramus that didn't know the Quran and the Hadith. It's an imbalanced way to represent scholars that you disagree with in that way. The fair way to do it is to really give them their due respect. And that begins with quoting the whole thing. To just take things out of context and give me half statements and then present. I mean, the way this teacher presented Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali, and then afterwards he says, the one that refuted him and responded to him was the greatest, in his opinion, the greatest scholar in Islam, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. It sets the mind of the student up in a way almost to make them prejudice. And it sets them up the way look at the way that these scholars are being presented. You'll have the guys on the Sufi Ash'ari side present the statements of their scholars backed up with verses from the Quran and hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And then they'll tell you what Imam Ibn Taymiyyah said without telling them what he was relying upon, what his proof for it was. On the other hand, You'll have the Salafi crowd present what Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, or like right now, Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali was saying, devoid of any Quran and any Hadith. He just tells you what he said, and in both sides, by the way, both cases, they don't present what the whole system, what was the whole statement. What did that scholar actually say? They'll choose that portion that supports what they were saying, what they want to say about that scholar. And then they will present what Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, and back that up with Quran and Hadith. What that does in the mind of the student is automatically setting him up to have a negative opinion of the other scholar, and show that your scholar is the one that's actually relying upon Quran and Hadith. It's not fair, it's dishonest by all accounts, and shame on anybody that tries to do that. If you want to present a particular case, you need to present everything. When, just a bit ago when I talked about music, you don't just present one opinion and just walk away, and then just use one interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. The fair way to do it is to actually present everything. Tell me what because they're all relying on, these scholars are not sitting there coming up with things from their own minds. Everybody agrees in usul, in the foundational principles of fiqh and jurisprudence and aqidah and everything, that the first thing that you go to is the Quran, then followed by the Hadith. So all of these scholars, and they do not become scholars. Imam Muhammad Al Ghazali, when he talks about sitting down and looks at his majlis, his students that were sitting while he was teaching, and he counts 700 min al-mu'ammamin. 700 of his students had the turbans, and the turbans back then were signifying scholarship. He had 700 scholars. To be a scholar, you need to be someone that knows your Quran and Hadith at the very least fully, completely. And he's teaching those people. He did not gain the name of Hujjatul Islam for nothing. And neither did Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He did not gain the name Shaykh al-Islam for nothing. It's ridiculous, and we need to stop it as a Muslim community. So back to the matan, the text. فَوَاجِبٌ لِرَبِّنَا الْوُجُودِ. You know that through your own innate nature, and you know that through just logic. And some people will say that the Quran doesn't use logic. Well, the Quran also doesn't. If you want to use that, if you're looking for a laid out proof that you find in philosophy books and logic books, you won't find it like that. The Quran uses a subtle way of going through this, and it uses metaphor, and it uses rhetorical language, and it uses a lot of different tools. For example, Imam Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, how did Imam Al-Shafi'i find the proof for ijma', for consensus, as a proof in the religion? Consensus of the scholars. In Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. Allah says that whoever disputes with the messenger after the truth has been made manifest to them, and follows a different way other than the way of the believers, and this statement right here is where you get the proof for consensus. وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. We'll just leave them to that which they've taken, and we'll burn them in hellfire, and that's the worst of consequences. So that's the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us proofs. I'll give you one example of how the Quran deals with the reader and the listener in a logical way. In Surah At-Tur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 35, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created out of nothing, or were they the creators? Did they just come out of, it was just pop up out of nothing, like how modern cosmologists are talking about the universe just popping up out of nothing, and there was nothing that brought it into existence? Or did it create itself? Well, if we say that the universe created itself, it brought itself into existence from non-existence, that automatically means we're saying that the universe existed before it didn't exist in order for it to bring itself into existence. Think about that for a minute. It's a problematic statement, and it doesn't make sense. It's illogical. So it's necessary. Why do we say it's necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for God to exist? Because this universe exists, and to explain this universe, and we know that the universe is temporal, meaning it came into being. We know that it had a beginning. What started all of this? What brought all of this into existence? It's necessary for something else to bring it into existence. It's a logical necessity. It's not in the possibility realm. It's not possible. We don't just go like, oh, maybe there is or maybe there isn't. It's a logical necessity by virtue of the fact that this universe is temporal. It began, it has a beginning, it didn't exist at some point and now it exists. It necessitates the existence of a being outside of it. And that being, if you investigate further, the necessary qualities of that being that come with it, that you can arrive at just through using logic. You don't need religion and revelation to tell you that this being must be pre-existent and everlasting. And that's the next line. He says, فواجب لربنا الوجود قدامه ثم البقاء الممدود وخلفه لخلقه ثم الغنى ووحدة مطلقة ولا عنا. That it is necessary that our Lord have existence. He needs to be pre-existent, and he also needs to be everlasting, extended to eternity. And he also needs to be dissimilar from his creation. And he needs to be self-sufficient. And he needs to be only one. These are necessary qualities. وقدرة إرادة ثم الحياة والعلم والدليل خلق الكائنات. He also has to have power. He needs to have will, and he needs to have life, and he needs to have knowledge. And the proof of these 10 attributes is the creation of existent things. If you look at the 10 necessary qualities, necessary attributes of God, his existence, his everlastingness, his pre-existence, the fact that he needs to be dissimilar from his creation, because if he has any similarity with the creation at all whatsoever, that means he was also created, because that similarity necessitates that he takes on that similarity. So he has to be also similar to his creation in some way. Absolute oneness, self-sufficiency. He needs to be self-sufficient. If he's in need for anything, that means that thing is greater than him. He's in need of something that can be provided to him from an outside source. Then that thing is greater than God. That automatically means that that thing is greater than God. So he needs to be self-sufficient. It's a necessity. ثم ووحدة مطلقة, and he needs to be uniquely one. He's utterly unique. Absolute oneness. The example of that, just to show that the Quran is using logic, is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the example from amongst ourselves. He says that when he strikes an example from ourselves, if we had something and we're equal partners in it, and just to give you an example for a corporation. In a corporation, if you start a company and you both own with somebody and you both have 50% and you both disagree on a decision, you're not going to go anywhere with that. You won't progress. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he cannot have partners, is what that says. Because if he has partners, and if you just look at Greek mythology, by the way, this is where you'll see the problem with having partners. Those pagan traditions that have, and polytheistic traditions, when you have multiple gods, you will have, the whole thing will collapse actually. The whole universe will end up collapsing. The whole show needs to be run by one and only one unique God. وَلَا عَنَا, and that God doesn't get tired from what he does. وَاللَّهُ الَّذِي لَا إِلَهَ هُوَ اللَّهُ الْحَيُّ الْقَيُّومُ لَا تَأْخُذُهُ سِنَةٌ وَلَا نَوْمٌ. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that's sustaining all of this. And no toil and no sleep overcomes him. He also needs to have power. Why does he need to have power? Because he brought this universe into existence. This whole thing to come into existence, it needs power. Power is the ability to transform one thing from one way to another. That's power. Well, that's what power is. And to bring the universe from non-existence into existence requires power. So it's a necessity for God to have power. Will, iradatun, to also be willing. He cannot be compulsed into bringing this world into existence. That's the point of that necessary quality. Because if he's compulsed, then you'll have to look into what's compulsing him, that thing is greater than him. And so basically what we're saying is that we're taking God and he's so transcendent upon all of from beyond all of this, that he has the absolute will and the absolute power and absolute life. Al-hayat. And when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has life, we're not talking about biological life. We're not talking about life in the way that we understand life. We're talking about life in that the life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has nothing to do with the life that we know, right? وَالْعِلْم, knowledge, to bring all of this into existence and to bring it in the way that it does, and the laws that we've discovered about it and the order that it has, it necessitates knowledge to bring all of this in the way that it has come. And then he says the proof of this is خلق الكائنات, the creation of existent things. Now, if we just look at, new atheism, modern day atheists, and the way that they address how they can say that this universe just is not created and whatever. If you reflect upon just about every atheist that in our modern times that talks about this stuff, you will see that their knowledge is usually restricted to a particular field in science. That's the field that they go with. They will either speak from a biological perspective and try to implore evolution, or they will speak from a geological perspective and the bringing about from the earth and how it evolved, or they'll speak about from a cosmological perspective. But you won't find somebody that brings the whole picture together and looks at everything at the same time and then arrive at the conclusion of becoming an atheist. I mean, this necessity for a God to exist, you can arrive at it through two ways. You can just go through this logical way of breaking it down, right? Which is possible. Or if you just go outside and just look around, that alone is enough for you to acknowledge the existence of God. The problem in our modern day age, and this is another thing that you'll find, I have yet to find an atheist that lives in nature. All atheists, if you notice, just look at where they come from. Cities. They've people that don't even know how to navigate through the night sky. They've never really seen the night sky properly. The cosmologists, if you they've done surveys on this, and I'll have to get you the reference, but cosmologists we're told that they're the most spiritual out of all scientists. It's because these are the only ones that really go out in nature and investigate it. Even biologists nowadays, biologists don't go out in nature. In spite of what they say about themselves going out in nature, they bring it all back to the lab and try to explain everything back from their office using computer programs. But to just go out and reflect and see and go through all this stuff and bring a big overall picture for everything, that's not something that the new atheist is doing. So when we say that the evidence is the creation of existent things, it's evidence for these attributes. You can only arrive at these attributes through reflection upon the creation. Okay? So, I mentioned before, this method is really quick to go through, and we just went through a couple of lines very quickly, and this is just the attributes of God that are necessary. God needs to have these in order for him to be God. The next lines, he starts talking about attributes that come about through revelation, that we learn about God through revelation. But before we get to that, if you just reflect upon the necessary qualities of God here and investigate the different religions, through the different religious dispensations that you'll find, the only religion that will fulfill every single one of those necessary attributes without a fail in any of them, if you investigate what they say about God, there's only two religions that will say that: Judaism and Islam. These are the two religions you'll arrive at. Christianity does not, in the way that is being taught. And the way they get around that, the way they get around how this can be not accepted, is by saying things like it's a divine mystery, you just have to have faith. But in order to do that, you have to negate some of what your intellect will arrive at. When we speak about God as a father, God having a son, God coming into the world, God being beat up, God being crucified, God having, all the stuff, God needing to forgive, God having a need for love, God having a need for... when you talk about it in that way, you start going against what the intellect can arrive at. So, and that's when Christians will tell you, no, you just have to have faith. And this is just devil talking. devil speech, devil using logic. Judaism, we'll see why after we go through the rest of this, why it actually ends up not completely fulfilling everything. But really, the two religions that you'll arrive at are Islam and Judaism. And Judaism, by the way, you have to be born a Jew. You cannot convert according to Orthodox Judaism. So if you're talking about religions that you'll convert to, Islam is the only one. Judaism still has some problems. And to know that, you'll see just in the book of Genesis. And you'll see in the Old Testament and the Torah, where some of these necessary qualities won't be completely fulfilled. So after just an initial arrival at Islam versus Judaism, and then when you start breaking it down, you'll find that Islam is really the only religion that will fulfill what the mind can arrive at regarding the necessary qualities and attributes of God. Beyond that, then you have to look at the rest of the things that can come through revelation. We'll leave it at that, and we'll continue with the rest of this in the next class, inshallah. But I think we've covered enough for today. We've gotten up to the end of the necessary qualities. This is something for you to reflect upon until the next time. The necessary qualities of God. These are things that that they're not on the possible round. You have the necessary, the possible, and the impossible. These are on the necessary. God needs to exist, and it's not that you just entertain the issue like an agnostic would. He has to. There's no way around it. And then all the other qualities and the attributes that he has. So فواجب لربنا الوجود قدامه ثم البقاء الممدود. Thus it is necessary that our Lord have existence, pre-existence, then everlastingness extended to infinity. وخلفه لخلقه ثم الغنى ووحدة مطلقة ولا عنا. The similarity from his creation, then self-sufficiency, and absolute oneness. There is no toil in what God does. وقدرة إرادة ثم الحياة والعلم والدليل خلق الكائنات. Power, will, furthermore life, and knowledge. Proof of these attributes is the creation of existent things. We'll leave it at that, and we'll inshallah continue in the next class. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.